Yeah. Okay, members, thank you very much for your patience, particularly those who have another meeting afterwards. We've had a briefing. It's now 11:45. Welcome to this morning's Employment Committee on Thursday, July the 6th. Before we start the apologies for absence, I would like to thank Dina for the presentation. I'll also welcome Bal Sander, our Human Resources Manager, Steve McGuinness, Interim Director of Mid-Kent Services, Catherine Harrison, our Learning and Development Manager. I'll also point out that we do not have legal representation today. That is because we just have the one item to consider. But I did have a chat with Donna Price. She did offer to come, and I took the executive decision to say, no, please don't bother. However, she is at the end of the phone. I have her extension if we need it, but I really don't think we do. So I hope that was with your permission, members. So we'll go on to apologies for absence, and I have Councillor Mrs. Fran Wilson, Councillor Mrs. Ring, and Councillor Mr. Mortimer, Derek Mortimer. So, notification of substitute members. Councillor Cox.
Councillor Cox for Councillor Derek Mortimer.
Please, thank you. And Councillor Clive English.
Councillor English for Councillor Fran Wilson.
Thank you. For McLaughlin.
Councillor McLaughlin for Councillor Mrs. Ring.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're there, aren't we? We're just missing Councillor Paul Harper, which is a pity. But there you go. Otherwise, we're full. Going on to urgent items. We have no urgent items. On to agenda item 4, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures from members? I take that as a no. Thank you very much. Members have no disclosures. Thank you very much. Disclosures of lobbying. Members, I take it there have been none. Thank you. Agenda item 6, whether any item should be taken in private because of disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any private or exempt matters. We have no yellow papers, so let us continue on to item 7, minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February 2017. Are we happy with page 1? Excellent. Page 2? Thank you. Page 3, are we happy for those members that were here? Members, may I respectfully suggest an amendment on page 328? I'm being a bit of an anorak. I wish to be clear. Where it says towards the end of the page, the group leader of the independents would be appointed to the subcommittees where indicated for the remainder of the municipal year, I would like to insert 2016/17. And on the next bullet point, the following year, insert 2017/18. The group leader of UKIP would be appointed. I'm being particularly pedantic because this is one of the very few occasions where we do not have elections and where we did have a very informal formal agreement, and I'd like to make sure that it's clear so that nobody has a heart failure if they see John instead of me or whatever. So, members, may I have your agreement to that amendment and my pedanticism? Thank you very much. Please don't look so cross. Councillor Burton, are you not happy? Oh, I'm glad you find me so engrossing. Thank you. Next minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of May 2017, which was when we elected the chairman and vice chairman. Are we happy with those minutes, members? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the agenda item 9, presentation of petitions. We don't have any, do we? Let's zip on agenda item 10. Members of the public, we don't have any, so there's no Q&A. Let's whip on to item 11. We're at last on to the workforce strategy update, and Dina will present this item. Over to you. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you, members. This is a very brief report of an update on the workforce strategy. may recall that the workforce strategy was agreed in June 2016 by Policy and Resources Committee, who requested that a regular update, 6-monthly update, was brought to this committee. So that's what the purpose of this report is. At the February meeting, there were quite a few questions around IIP. I've tried to answer those questions within the body of the report, so hopefully that has done that job. So the main thing I wanted to do was to look at the action plan, which is in Appendix 1, not quite sure what, page 14 of your papers, and just highlight a couple of the areas that we're particularly pleased with, and then talk to you about what needs to go into the revised action plan. You will see there that we've got a section on the first page about minimising stress amongst the workforce. We've done quite a lot over the years to bring in, for example, speakers from the NHS. We've got our employee assistance programme. There are quite a few things that the Council has done. But when we've brought external speakers in, often it's been really poorly attended. And so for several years, we've been trying to think about how we could do something that was perhaps more positively publicised, if you like. And so we've designed one of Catherine's member of staff and ourselves have designed resilience training. So instead of talking about stress, we're talking about resilience. It's a very interactive programme. It's a half day, and we've got 2 separate half days. One is for line managers, which is about recognising symptoms of stress in your staff and the things that you can do about it. And the other is for members of staff, and it is quite an eclectic mix of things around diet, mindfulness, things that you can do in terms of the way your job's set up, all kinds of things to help people to become more resilient. We've had really good feedback from members of staff about that, and we continue to run those. So that's something we're particularly proud of. We've also really pleased with the feedback. So there's the stuff in the report about IIP. A lot of what's in IIP overlaps with what's in the workforce strategy, but the workforce strategy is bigger than IIP. So it doesn't look in detail at some of the things that we would consider were important for the overall workforce strategy. But one of the things that we got feedback on when we got the IIP results, the report, was something that we've worked on a lot here, which is about embedding our values. And that came back consistently from all members of staff about how well Strive, and many of you will have been to the Strive Awards, how well embedded that is in the organisation. And that is, those of you who've worked in other places, that's actually a really hard job to do, is to properly embed values in an organisation. So we're very, very proud of that. And it seems that overall, people kind of feel that we're well organised, well managed, and they know what we stand for, which is the values. The areas that we feel we've got to do some more work on is around winning the hearts and minds and really taking people with us on the kind of development agenda, and that's the sort of bigger question for us in the future. But focusing on some of the other things that are working well, the market supplement is working well. We have it in just 2 areas, I think, is that right, Bar? 2, which is planning and building control, and that has enabled us to recruit in areas that have been traditionally very hard to fill. So again, that's something that IIP wouldn't look at, but is part of the overall strategy. So what you've got in Appendix 1 is the original action plan that was devised at the time of the 2016 workforce strategy, and the end column is an update as to where we are on all of those things. But now we've got the IIP feedback, we will rewrite this. So for the next time you see this report, that some of the same things will be in there, but it will be rewritten to reflect the feedback that we've had from IIP. So the kinds of things that we think we're going to be focusing on next time: we need to do some work on an apprenticeship programme that has been successful in the past, but in the last couple of years cohort we found it difficult to both recruit and retain. So we need to do some work on what we do with that. We definitely need to do something around the employee voice, and that's about how we encourage people to feel that their voice is being heard in the organisation. We do an awful lot of communication with people. We encourage them to talk to us, but a lot of the communication is top down. It's about us telling them what's going on, etc. So it's the bottom-up stuff we need to encourage. We need to do some things to reinforce what we mean by the Maidstone manager and what we expect. And quite a lot of the IIP report focused on building capability, so we need to ensure that people feel that they're getting the opportunity to develop the capabilities they've got within the organisation. So that will be around things like succession planning and a more structured approach to succession planning than perhaps we've had before. And finally, the other two areas, leadership has come forward as one of the things that we need to do some work on. Obviously, when we've got the new Mid-Kent Services Director and the two new heads of service, that will kind of that will be a slightly different feel to the management team at the council, so we will do more work with them. But there's also some information in IIP about officer member relations, and the work on that in terms of how we might address that is going to start on, I believe it's the 26th of this month, with a workshop from the LGA to look at how we go forward with all of that. So there'll be work coming out of that. And finally, we certainly need to do something on reward. We think that that's not so much pay scales, although people often pin it on pay scales. It's actually more about supporting our managers, encouraging our managers to use the mechanisms that they've actually got in the policy framework to recognise what staff are doing. So sometimes it's as easy as trying to get managers, or as difficult as trying to get managers to just remember to say thank you to people. Sometimes it's reminding them that we've got a cash and non-cash award policies. So actually, if somebody's done a good project, there are mechanisms there to give them some form of recognition through, you know, a meal voucher, a bunch of flowers, whatever it happens to be that's appropriate for the individual. But line managers are quite careful with their budgets, and so it comes out of their budget, and so they don't always use that mechanism. So we've got to do some work reminding them of that, and also to try and put something together so that people can see the full value of the package they get. Because actually, with things like the local government pension scheme, the kind of levels of training that they get here, they're actually getting a very well-rounded package, but people kind of take it for granted, so we've got to try and do some work on that. So I'll finish there and open for questions.
Thank you very much, Dina. First of all, I've got Councillor Blackmore, and then I'll take Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Just three things, actually, if I may. The first relates to the apprenticeships. I'm assuming part of the reason for the drop-off is because we've come out of that sort of baby boom area from the late, I think, 1990s. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's something more sinister than that. Maybe we're just in an environment where there is a choice of apprenticeships across the area. I don't know. If you're able to give just a little bit more detail, I'd be quite interested. Second thing, re the no-skill knowledge gaps. A little bit more detail on that, because I think that's incredibly important as we do have people, as you say, retiring or leaving. Whether we backfill or whether we look to recruit at that level. I noticed that the employment handbook has completed. When is that due for a refresh? I'm assuming it's not it's been done, that's it, we put it in the cupboard and never looked at it again. I'm assuming that will come back in about 24 months' time. And finally, about the reward issue, I agree with you, Mrs. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm rubbish at maths, I forgot to tell you, which is why it's 4, not 3. I think the issue about the rewards is quite interesting. It could even be as simple as an extra session of childcare for a working mum, or something as simple as that maybe half a day off, maybe leaving early on a Friday or coming in late on a Monday morning. I think especially, and that applies to both mums and dads, it can be really simple things that help. And if you look at the feedback I think the managers gave a while ago, two of the things that staff really valued were the flexibility and I think it was flexi time as well. And whether you're caring for elderly relatives or you're caring for children, I think those two things are incredibly important. And you're absolutely right, it's not just about money. That's important too, but I think that whole flexibility issue, whatever we can do there, really helps.
I was going to say those are really excellent points, and I would ask Mrs. Smart, as far as the action plan is concerned, that would go under the key theme rewards, or would you rather just take that back to managers? Because I do think that's a very important. Some important points have been raised.
Okay, so if I can take each of those in turn, and I might ask colleagues to help out in different areas. With regard to the apprenticeship programme, the drop-off isn't down to the baby boom. We don't believe. There's a couple of things at play here. There are a lot more apprenticeships around, so there is more competition. And to be fair, we don't actually fare that well in that competition because we don't pay very well. So we took a choice. We've had an apprenticeship scheme, though some of you may remember the YTS, Youth Trainee. So we've actually had that long before my time. The council had a kind of YTS scheme, and we've kept it going. Obviously, we don't call it that anymore, but the council has had a smallish budget for that kind of apprenticeship type approach for years and decades. And 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, perhaps even 4 years ago, Catherine wrote the reports, but we took a report to change what we did. So we used to have just 2 apprentices paid at minimum wage, and we wanted to extend that opportunity to others. So we took a report to the management team. We'd seen an example of where the apprenticeship scheme worked very well, paying apprenticeship rates, which are very much lower. And so we thought, actually, if that works well elsewhere, we could bring that here and double the number of apprentices that we've got, which is what management team agreed we would do. So we then went out and tried to recruit maybe even as many as 4 or 5, but certainly 4, maybe the money stretched further. And we did manage to recruit to that level, but we didn't retain them all. And then the following year, we never even managed to recruit 4. And this year, we only managed to recruit 2, and one of them left very quickly. Kent County Council, massive employer, massive opportunity. They are paying, I believe, minimum wage. So it's kind of 2 or 3 times what we're paying. So we haven't yet gone out to recruit for the apprenticeship programme this year because we want to review what we're doing and we want to come up with some different approaches. In addition to that, there's quite a lot of evidence that the schools, because the money follows the pupils, the schools are very incentivised to retain the pupils in school. They have not been promoting apprenticeship programmes and promoting what kids can get if they actually leave school and go out to get an apprenticeship. I think that's changing with the government push, but so we're kind of working. There's a couple of things, and we aren't necessarily making the best of ourselves given what we've been paying. I think that's the main thing with that, and we'll look to change it. With succession planning, the move towards that developing everyone framework is the first kind of step for us around trying to be more systematic about identifying whether people are in that category of trying to be ready for the next role, etc. We do have business continuity planning, which kind of is a similar sort of thing to what you were talking about in terms of making sure that you haven't got standalone experts, that nobody else can do the work if they're not there. And it's, you know, it's trying to make those a bit more systematic and bring those to the fore, which is part of the work we need to be doing. I think we do succession planning, but it's very ad hoc at the moment. In terms of the handbook, yes, we update. I mean, we've had a handbook in place here since about 2007, and we do update it. It's also, as things change, we put information on the intranet, and people would know to go there. But, and we had, last time we reprinted it, there were quite a few people that said, oh, you know, don't you need to just do this electronically? But actually, new starters really quite like taking away a small A5 booklet that has all the kind of summary of everything that goes on in the council. And for the depot staff, we've got a large number of people that don't work on PCs, so having a manual copy works well for them. And the final one was under reward. Again, I think, to blow our own trumpet, if you compared our reward package here, what's actually available with the majority of other councils, not all, but the majority of other councils, we've done a really good job. Bal did a massive piece of work back in about 2008 to look at what was in total rewards. So we've got a whole raft of things that are available. Flexibility is definitely one of the things that our staff most value. And, you know, we seek to try and increase that, but I think it is more about getting out and reminding managers what they can do. Bal did a roadshow. What do you want to say?
Yeah. So we run wellbeing weeks every year. So last year we ran one. This year actually we ran one in May.
Are you on?
Am I not on? You're not on.
Oh.
Okay. So with the wellbeing that we organised this year, we promote kind of all the benefits and rewards that we've currently got in the council. So we regularly do send out reminders to staff. We regularly send out emails linking rewards to kind of wellbeing events. So we do send that information out, but I think staff do still forget what's available to them. So like Dina said, we do need to do more work around that. But it's not something that we don't regularly promote or regularly review. I mean, just recently I've had an email through from Powerway who are offering discounts to staff to go out to them for like exercise classes. So I'm trying to get that promoted in the council. So we do try and link things in regularly as much as we can.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Blackmore? Can I move on to Councillor Perry? Or?
Ecstatic.
Wow, what do you know, Councillor Perry? Down to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just like to come back to the main report, and it's really on page 9. The investors in people, it's a favourite topic of mine. You seem to put a lot of reliance on investors in people. Personally, from my own experience, I remain a sceptic. I have to say that. You talk about a cost of £16,000, if I got that right. But it's not the whole story, is it? Because I've been involved with investors in people. I know that there's quite a drain on internal resources that can be, and that's not costed into this at all. And how much of this, and dare I say this, is borrowing your watch to tell you the time? Because I think a lot of this can be. Now, another point I've got on the report is on page 11. Good old Myers and Briggs, which have been involved with. 360-degree feedback process. Again, my business experience is not great with this. I actually think it's a lovely sort of topic, and people say, oh yes, 360 degrees, great idea. But in reality, it does require quite a lot of psychological training to get this one right. Because if you get it wrong, you can end up in a complete mess with it. And I've seen a few examples of complete messes with this. It doesn't always work. Staff themselves often get in a muddle with it. So I'd like to know exactly where we are with that and what our plans are. They're my 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perry. So I absolutely agree. The 16,000 is not costing in staff time, and I've absolutely no idea what that would be. As you can see, people were asked to complete questionnaires, which probably took them 10 to 15 minutes. and there were about 50 or so, 10% of the staff went into some sort of work interview or focus group with the assessor. I can't say that I'm aware that anybody complained about that, and I genuinely don't think it would help us to try and quantify the value of that. I don't necessarily agree that we're putting all our eggs in the IIP basket, because I think we do quite a lot of things between the assessments. The assessments are only every 3 years. And certainly in the past, we've done all kinds of surveys. So we can do Survey Monkey Pulse surveys, so we get answers to quick questions. We've done the Health and Safety Executive Stress at Work survey, which also features a lot around how are you managed. So we do get feedback in varying different ways. But I think for members, the key question is the strategic one, which is what kind of employer do we want to be? So if we want to be an employer that is interested in engaged staff, and therefore we're interested in what staff think about working here, then we will need to ask them in some way, shape or form, how do you feel about working here? Now, personally, my advice would always be to the organisation that if you're going to have that kind of information come to you, it needs to come in a way which is well researched and validated and benchmarked. And there are various organisations that can do that for you. Times Top 100 Best Companies, they can do that for you, and we've certainly used them previously when we used to ask for engagement information. IIP can do that for you. But or we could go to freelance consultants who could definitely knock up a questionnaire for us, but they wouldn't be well researched and as well benchmarked and validated. So the strategic question, I think, to the members is, what kind of employer do you want to be? And if the answer is, we want to be one that has engaged staff and we want to know whether they're engaged, then we will need to use some form of mechanism to ask those questions. Officers will have varying views about what that mechanism can be. At the end of the day, we won't be moving towards another IIP assessment for 2.5 years, so I guess that conversation would need to happen at that point in time. So does that answer your question on that one? Okay. And then in relation to the other, you're absolutely right. 360-degree feedback has to be incredibly well handled. And so when we did it, and we did it for all of the management fraternity 2 years ago. We went out to tender and we used an organisation that is run and owned by occupational psychologists. So they constructed the questionnaire based on the competencies that make for engaging managers, because that's what we were interested in looking at. And they handled, so it was an electronic questionnaire, and all the reports and the analysis went to them. So it was an off-site, so it was very confidentially handled. And they also, if there was anything that flagged as a kind of red flag where people were getting extreme ratings from either those above or those, that was flagged to us so that we could give some support to the line managers who were giving feedback. The reason it's mentioned there is that, well, actually, Catherine might be able to answer this in terms of the recent management programme and what we've done for that and how we've amended it to make it more fulsome. Do you want to say a word on that? You need to go green, or do I?
Yeah, so we've always run management programmes. In the past, we've run the ILM Level 3 Award and Level 5 Award, which is the Institute of Leadership and Management. We moved this year to CMI, Chartered Management Institute, same qualification, different accreditator. But what we chose to do this year is improve the offering to the people who are on that programme. So rather than just attending a series of workshops and completing the assignments in order to get the certificate. We added to the programme internally through our own resources by, first of all, we asked them to do the 360 and get involved in the 360 for managers that we'd already developed. And myself and the Learning and Development Officer delivered their feedback to them so we could be sure the feedback was being well handled. So we ran those feedback sessions and we were able to use those sessions to identify their areas for development, which directly then linked to the training that they would do on their CMI training. And we also did some of the Myers-Briggs training with them to help them just understand themselves better, be more aware of their own kind of preferences and to understand the preferences of their team better. And we are going to give them an opportunity. So they have now finished their CMI. We are literally waiting for the certificates to arrive any day now. They've done their final presentations. And we have made the offering that when they get to the 12-month point, which will be about November, December from when they started, that they can rerun their 360 so that we can identify if the development that we picked up at the beginning has enabled them to see their improvement. So it's an example really of where the 360 tool is used for really practical methods so we can track, this is what you wanted to improve in, this is the training we did, and now 12 months down the line, are we seeing that in your next 360?
Are you satisfied with that response, Councillor Perry? I hope you are.
Thank you for the leading question. Yeah, sorry. Now, I'm very reassured that you've used occupational psychologists. I do think because this is very, very key to this making this work, and it is a difficult area, and I realise that. So, yeah, thank you very much. That's very comprehensive.
Okay, I've now got Councillor Burton, then I've got Councillor Cox and Councillor English. Councillor Joy, I know that... Did you want to speak? Oh, I beg your pardon, and I know you're required at another meeting, but are you okay after Councillor English? Okay. Councillor Burton.
I am on. Right. I think Councillor Perry has already substantially made the point that I wanted to draw out, but I would like to underline it a little, because if you refer actually to the minutes of the last meeting, the last full meeting on page 3, this committee did express a very, very clear view on what they thought the value of investors in people might be. And then to receive this report, which is really centred around, so it's almost a question to colleagues, do we actually still maintain the position that we made very clear last time? Or are we now beginning to be convinced? And what I would add to that is that, you know, in some of the informal conversations that I've had with officer members of staff, how can I put this? I don't sense that they share the importance of the IIP aspect. That's the feedback that I, get in some of my one-to-one conversations that from time to time occur. So, as a committee, are we still standing by our minute of last time, or do we feel more convinced by it?
Actually, I would like to come in here and say I note what you say, Councillor Burton. However, at the moment, we are currently, please correct me if I'm wrong, we are tied into the IIP process. We're halfway through a 3-year programme or something. I might be a bit wrong there. But we are committed for an X period. In preparation for the end of that period, that will be the time for this committee to raise its concerns about IIP. I'm not convinced that this particular meeting is the appropriate place to raise that, and that's simply because this committee is being asked at this particular meeting to note the progress of the action plan of the workforce strategy, of which IIP has made a contribution to it, but not a complete contribution to it. But I think your points about IIP and members' dissatisfaction with it are probably quite appropriate, but now is not the time to consider it. I'll ask Dina to comment.
I think I'd go back to what I said a few minutes ago, which is it's about a strategic decision. That to me is my understanding of where members come in. Is the strategic decision is what sort of employer do you want to be? And if you do want to be an employer that's engaging, and therefore you will need to ask staff for how they feel about things, then that's the kind of strategic decision. Thereafter, the way in which we gather that information, I think, you know, we go through tendering process and all sorts of things. It's when Councillor Gooch said we're in the middle of a 3-year programme, at the point that members expressed some, were a bit kind of unsure about the value of IIP in February, we'd already paid for and had all the interviews and everything had already taken place. We were awaiting the report. That's why it was mentioned in the report that you got in February. So, if you like, the job was already done because we were due our 3-year assessment. We do get some ongoing support. She'll come in probably once a year. We don't have to pay any extra for that. That's all part and parcel of what you pay for up front. And the council can take a decision in two years' time as to whether it wants to continue to be an IIP employer. Personally, I think it would be disappointing for any public sector body to actually say, do you know what, we're not that interested in developing our staff and we're therefore not that interested in being an IIP employer. It has changed and developed a lot over the years. But I think it also needs to be clear in the way that we use it. So we internally do a lot of work to try and identify what we should do as an organisation to continually improve things. We are interested in continual improvement. And what the IIP report does is it gives us the opportunity to focus on what areas we should therefore improve. So things like where do people fit into the organisation? And people don't really know what the values are. That came out of our IIP assessment back in 2013. And so we actually targeted quite a lot of work, and that's why we're so pleased that we've actually seen that that's paid off. So we use it as a kind of, if you like, a way of shedding a light on what we need to do that's important to improve the organisation. I don't think either Catherine and I are overly wedded to IIP, but I think, again, if you want to be an employer that has that, it's important what your staff think. We have to get that information from somewhere, and staff are much less likely to tell an internal source than an external source, would be my view.
And there may even be other organisations, I don't know, that do something similar to what IIP do. That is something I wouldn't know, but perhaps it could be covered when the strategic issue decision has to be made. What says to you, Councillor Burton? Are you satisfied with that answer before I'd like to move on, please?
I think we could enlarge this debate endlessly. I'd say there are many other metrics that also give indication of staff satisfaction. Retention rates is actually a fairly good one quite often. My question was whether colleagues just still supported that statement we made last time, and I would like to see at least mention in the minutes of this aspect of discussion, albeit it's outside of the terms of this report.
I take your point, certainly. It will not
Madam
be
Chairman, on this particular point, as opposed to the other points, I think actually there is, I don't have a, I'm not wedded to any particular position on IOP, but I do think there is a very serious procedural point. The committee resolution here says specifically that a report comes back to the next meeting evaluating the investors in people best practice and to assess how the council carries out its assessment for investors in people accreditation. That is what the resolution actually says. If this committee wants to take a different view, then that's fine, but there needs to be a countervailing agenda item and decision, because this committee cannot, for whatever good reasons, like any other committee of the council, just decide that a resolution that has been formally passed does not proceed. You have to formally change it at some point. So, failing that, a report has to be written and it has to be submitted. I'm sorry, that's just the legal position. And it has to be done, or the committee has to put on the agenda of a forthcoming meeting of this committee that it's not going to do it at this time. End of story.
Take a point about the resolution. We just have one particular report at this committee. But I'll ask
yes, and by so doing, you have, unless this is a special meeting called out of sequence, which actually already voided a previous resolution of this committee by not presenting it.
I will let Dina take the answer.
Okay. I have to confess that when I read that resolution, I didn't understand it. So I have absolutely... So what you've got, I watched the webcast, because obviously I wasn't here. I watched the webcast, so what you've got is the answers to the sorts of questions that were raised in the meeting itself. So I struggled with certain of the terms, and I couldn't correct the minutes because I wasn't actually at the meeting. So I struggled with some of the terms that were in here. So I am not sure what it means to evaluate for Investors in People best practice. Investors in People is a franchised, well, it's, I think actually it's a government body, Investors in People. At the time that we ran the Investors in People process here, it was franchised to Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton, who are, you probably know as accountants, and they do lots of other things, consultants, they had the franchise for 3 years, and they have handed it back to the government body a year early. Investors in People is Investors in People. There is no such thing as Investors in People best practice. It is what it is. There are no other organisations that you can go to get IIP accreditation. You could go to Best Companies and get Times Top 100 accreditation, but it wouldn't give you IIP accreditation. So I actually can't write you a report on that because as such it doesn't exist. And then if you break down the second part of the sentence, and to assess how the Council carries out its assessment for Investors in People accreditation, I wasn't sure whether that meant how do we actually run the IIP assessment process. Well, we run it in accordance with the way that the IIP assessors tell us to run it. We don't say, oh, actually, you can't have the list of staff so that you can at random pick 50 people. Here's the agreed list that we want you to interview. The way that they do the assessment is prescribed. So I'm really sorry, and maybe we could almost go back to the minutes and rewrite to actually clarify what you wanted, but I can't write you a report on that resolution.
Because I didn't understand it either. However, what I do stick by is that the only way out of this correctly is actually to schedule a short report item on a future agenda and to establish what actually was meant by this and what the timescale for such an action, if any action is intended, should be. Because at the moment we have a resolution that is quite opaque. I'm sure the people who moved it I hope they knew what it meant, but it's quite opaque. And we have a process that, you know, at some point we may or may not wish to proceed with. But so I think we do need, from a purely procedural point of view, to actually get and timetable to have this on a future agenda and not wait for the strategic review, because as the timetable comes along, because, you know, it's a mess, not to put too fine a point on it, and it needs sorting out.
I'm sure we can sort it out. Martin Cox, Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I think we're really just lacking a couple of brackets, and maybe that would make it a lot easier, because if you actually read it, the committee requests that a report comes back to the next meeting evaluating investors in peoples as a best practice and to assess how the current council carries out its assessment of investors in people. Because we were really meaning, we wanted to know how much time is taken up by officers to achieve the accreditation. And that's what the feeling of the meeting was, as I was the chair at that meeting. And so, yes, so as Councillor Perry has asked, what really is the cost of that? And so it's the evaluation of the process, I think. But I would say, if there was a problem about what was really meant, we could have rung and spoken and just said, yeah, we've agreed the minutes, I agree. I was actually, at the time we were agreeing the minutes, going, I'm sure it was something that we were going to be having. Should have looked at this earlier. I didn't know I was really going to be subbing, and as I said, didn't get it. I think the easiest way is to what Councillor English has said, that if now we get the feeling, we can see now as a committee that we are in this for another 2 years. So therefore, I agree with what the current chairman is saying. We need to assess this at the proper time. But I think as we can get a bit of a straw poll about this, we can see we'd like it looked at so that we can feel £16,000 is being well spent, because I think that's what the hinge was really looking at, and whether or not we could use the skills of the HR department to have our own assessment, in a sense. I hope that sort of clears it up.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I didn't ring anybody because I watched the webcast. And so the questions that were raised at the webcast is what I drew in terms of the meaning of the information you want. So Councillor Ring asked specific questions about how many people at the depot were able to fill the questionnaire in. I've answered that. There was a question about the cost. There was some thought that it might cost 60,000. Actually, it cost 16. I answered that. So in honesty, I absolutely agree with you. I took the flavour of that kind of wording to be a summary of what was discussed at the meeting, which I'd observed through the webcast, and I thought I had answered most of those points in the report.
That's, yeah, go on, come.
That was what I was going to add to that situation. Do you, I'm answering back in a sort of a, do you want to go back on this same situation? Can I still have a question that I had originally?
If I may just come back on this point, the 60,000 that Mrs Smart raised was actually a comment I made at that meeting. And the reason I made it is because the actual product may cost 16,000, but the time taken by different members of staff to, whether it's undertake the survey, evaluate the survey, do the 360, if you take all those bits of time added together and the resources, the actual total cost could come to approximately 60,000. Now, I know you're shaking your head at me, Mrs Smart. There were at least 2 people who were present in the meeting at the time who said, actually, you could be right about that, because it's not as easy as saying, OK, this is the bottom line cost. That's the figure that appears, but when you actually add up everything associated with it, you know, the indirect cost, the fact that a manager is involved in it, if you then take all the on-costs associated with that time, the true cost is not 16,000. So I think we have to be very careful when we have figures, and actually, how is that substantiated?
I absolutely take your point. However, I also take the point that for different organisations, because I think at the time that you were speaking in the committee, you were talking about somebody that you'd spoken to, different organisations will be different costs. So if they are assessing an organisation that's got 20,000 members of staff, obviously the cost is much higher because they'll have to do a lot more interviews to get a statistically sound sample, and therefore it's a lot more assessor time. But if you consider that in our report it was 54 people had been either interviewed or in a focus group. So we've got staff on all sorts of hourly rates, ranging from probably, off the top of my head, the lowest rate is about £7.50 up to probably £25. So even if you said £10 or £15, 50 members of staff for an hour, you're talking £500 of their time, of cost in terms of salary. Probably, I don't know, maybe a day or two of Catherine and her team's time. So you'd be hard-pressed to be finding more than a couple of thousand in terms of the actual staffing cost if you costed it up for the time taken. The 360s aren't part of this. The 360s was a separate thing. And all the analysis is done by the assessor, which is what you're, part of what you're paying the $16,000 for. So I'd be really surprised if it came to anything like even 20,000, I would think, if you costed in the time, because staff are just not spending that long with the assessor. It's, as I say, it's an hour session to reflect on the organisation, but we get quite a lot of information back from that. So just to try and reassure you, it's, I genuinely don't think you're in any of that kind of territory.
Councillor Grigg, I think you were looking at me as if you wanted to come in on this specific subject. Is it something separate? Because I've got Councillor Joy, who's got to go through the other questions. But I would have to say that we've got...
I did have some other points, but I can wait until after Councillor Joy.
Well, I'd rather knock this on the head now while we're thinking about it.
No, I only came in then because it was on that point.
Yeah,
I did
but
have
you're
some
still
other.
on my list. Okay. So I think what we need to do here... We've got some answers that have been given. Is it on this particular point? If it is, then yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at in your update here, the first thing I see is that you're expecting the results. This is the second point on the progress. The activity took place in December 16. And you're expecting the results still. Now, I guess you've got the results because throughout here you do mention what the IIP people said. Now, this is the start and end of the 3-year process, and as I understand it, you're planning on repeating this in 3 years' time, right? So the decision about doing that, as the Chair has already said, is in 3 years' time, and I don't think we need to dwell too much on that at this point in time. What I would find useful... Well, let me just say two other things. I think the concern I had is that we were simply chasing a gold medal or award, whatever you call it, so that potential employees could see that we are a worthy company. It was a tick-in-the-box thing. What you've explained today is the follow-through on some of these things in the way that you actually manage your workforce. Now, presumably that will be apparent in the report that they produce, where they say where you've got strong points and where you've got weak points. And the follow-on from that, I think, is an excellent way to proceed. It might help the committee, if it wasn't too bulky, to see this report that comes back, so that we can see what we've got for our 16,000, and assess from that whether the process and how we want to be viewed as an employer is more readily understandable than just a silver or gold sticker. So would that be possible?
It is a very bulky report. It's 42 pages of quite a lot of turgid kind of analysis, if you like. I do take somewhat issue with what you say, though, in terms of were we just chasing the gold? I'd absolutely say categorically not. The whole point about IIP, you can chase gold, some organisations do it, but for us, there's absolutely no point in doing that because we want to work in an organisation that genuinely is engaging its employees, is developing people, and therefore, whatever the assessment level comes out at, then that's where we're at. And in this I mentioned Generation 6, this is the new version of IIP where they do the engagement survey. In previous versions, you could say, we'd like to be assessed at gold level or silver level, and the payment was differential for that. That's not the case now. there's a payment irrespective of what level you come out at, and they do the assessment, and then they decide the level. So we could have got gold, we could have just got the basic standard, we could have got platinum, very unlikely, because they don't expect to award it to anybody.
Thank you for that. It was always my impression that they graded you, not that you applied for the grade you wanted to be measured at. And what I actually said is I think the problem the committee had, and I did certainly, was it was a perception that you were chasing an award. I didn't actually allege that that's what you were doing.
In order to try to conclude this, did you have one comment? Well, I want to just try and conclude this point about there appears to be a resolution from the February meeting that has not been processed. This is purely a technicality. And I think, Councillor English, you suggested that we have a report that just briefly sets out the reasons that have been explained here so that they can be formally agreed. But now is not the place to do it,
no.
Although the webcast obviously contains all the answers that we need.
I'm sorry if I was being very formulaic, but I think
I know
it is
you were being
necessary.
very pedantic, but legally I know that you're correct. So therefore, as you've brought it up, I do need to follow it through. Now, members, are you happy with that process, Councillor Burton?
Can I just have clarity on whether we will have that report or not? I'd quite like to read it. Yeah. No, not that report, but yes, the report that Councillor McLaughlin just asked for.
In other words, a summary of what has just been discussed
No. Councillor McLaughlin, the full, yes. Yeah, I mean, I would like to read it. I was just asking for clarity of whether we are to receive that or not. That's just a very simple question.
Could you send it to them electronically?
I can send it to you electronically. I don't see there's any reason why
It's not
you
too
can't.
big, is it?
It's, well, no.
I mean,
It's PDF.
Yes, the report will be emailed. I was just concerned as to whether it might be too big in terms of mega, whatever it is. Okay. So there will be a report that, Councillor English, just a briefing outlining what we've said at this meeting so that we can tie up the legal technicalities. Now, next on my list, I believe it was Councillor Cox. And then it's Councillor Joy. Is everybody happy with that? Yes. Thank goodness for that. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. Something different, something new. You mentioned, Dana, that you were talking about officers or people giving staff rewards of some description or another, time or money or whatever. And you said that some people didn't like to use them, or that's the impression I got, because of their budgets. Is it a practice that's used anywhere else that your department holds the budget for that, and therefore it's not going to hurt individual departments' budgets? Would that be a better way? Because it's something then that you are in charge of, but it is there for people to use, but it's not going to affect their direct budget. I just wonder whether that would ease people's thoughts on being able to reward staff, because I think it would sit better with your department than within departments to use. Just my idea.
I think that would be one solution. I can think of some issues with it in terms of how you make it fair across the council, you know. So if you get some departments who are pretty quick off the mark at getting their requests in and then all the budget's gone, how is that fair for staff elsewhere? I think the other thing to point out, though, is that the scale within the policy is fairly small. So this is not about you know, massive bonuses. So the non-cash awards are for things like box of chocolates, meal voucher, up to £50. Okay, so very small. And then the cash awards are up to £500. We have a pay budget of something like £14 million. And I would say that if a line manager went overspent by £500 on their staffing budget, because they'd given a cash award that their director had agreed, because it's a director sign-off, there is not going to be any consequence to that on a £14 million staffing budget. So I think it's more about, personally, and then to be able to keep it fair, you know, so you've not got that whole, oh my God, the pot's running out, we better get the awards in now. I think it would be better, obviously I'm thinking off the top of my head, I think it's more about educating managers, to be honest, to that degree.
Yeah, I was really getting the idea that you were saying people were leaving money that they had been given within their budgets, not saying that you hold a £15,000 budget and the first person in gets it. I was under the impression that it was already in their budget as an amount and they had left it there. So if what you're saying is now correct, as I understand it, then attend the sick and leave the well alone.
Okay, Councillor English, you are next. Briefly, please, and then it's
Yes,
Councillor
just two
Joy.
brief points. There is also negative reinforcement which is mentioned in the report in terms of there were some strains between members and officers that are referred to in this. And then it goes on to talk about a facilitated session with the LGA. I'm sorry if I'm being completely thick here, but who would the facilitated session with the LGA be for?
It would be, oh sorry, I've still got my button on. It's with group leaders.
Right.
And group leaders, I'm hoping that whatever we discuss there, group leaders will feed back to their group. And indeed, there may be a conversation, once we know what the agenda is, that there could be a pre-group meeting. But it's group leaders.
Okay, fine. I think there needs to be some conversation somewhere else in the council about how, once it goes back to the groups, those individual groups actually take forward some of those, but that's probably not for today's meeting. Second question, on the previous subject which we're discussing in the appendix about apprenticeships, that falls under the banner of where it says need driver, a representative and balanced workforce. I don't dispute for any moment that getting more employees under the age of 25, which I can vaguely remember myself, is actually a desirable thing. It is a very desirable thing. But I would merely observe that a representative and balanced workforce comprises many other things apart from the gender ratio, which I think we're reasonably okay on, and age. There are many other categories. In particular, I've seen a lot of negative publicity nationally, not about us, but nationally about the very high unemployment and underemployment rates amongst the disabled. So I would just merely observe that when we're looking at these categories, we should be very, we should take the opportunity, shall we say, not just to look at the age profile, but to see what we can actually do across the board on this. And just an observation, maybe it's me, but I would have thought that when we look at the cross-cutting implications, a report on a workforce profile should have some equality impact somewhere down the line, because what can be more of an equality impact on someone as to whether or not they get a job or a promotion? So I would have thought it was an overarching consideration.
So we do quarterly workforce reports. In the original workforce strategy, which was on the background documents, and if anybody's interested, there were 4 copies over. I just printed off 4 hard copies. The workforce profile was quite key to looking at that. The under-25s are massively underrepresented in this workforce. Disabled, I think, are at 8% at the moment, so actually we're pretty, we're reasonably well represented for the working age population of disabled staff. And obviously, you're quite right, there are actions, there's a separate equalities reports that go to, not even sure which committee it goes to now, produced by policy, the policy team, and there are all sorts of action plans within that. So this was just picking up one of the key ones that we knew we could directly influence, because that's the other thing, is that so many areas on the equalities are indirect influence.
I take your point, but it does, and I don't want to prolong this unnecessarily, but I do think that when we look at overarching implications of headline reports like that, actually, when you get to them, there actually is an equalities implication, and it should have appeared in that section of the report.
Okay. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Joy.
She'll be brief. Just to say, when I first read the workforce plan, I was encouraged, because I looked at it and I did think the way it was working and everybody's involvement, for me, made me see that it was a way forward, and for 2017 I was quite happy. Listening to Councillor Blackmore when she spoke about reinforcing the benefits and flexi time, totally agree with all that. I think it's things like that that we should be encouraging. Morale generally for staff and how they are valued, for me, is a big thing, not just to be to get a bunch of flowers or whatever. And I think we play a big part in that as councillors. And there's nothing in here at all that mentioned us, our relationship with the staff. And I think that is what comes across as being as important as everything else. I hope we, all do the same thing. We want information. We zap that button that says, I would like this. And if it doesn't come back that day or the next day, we're quick to send back again saying, well, I sent you that. They might not have been at the desk and might not have seen it, don't know. But when it comes through, just to take that second to say thank you. Thank you for that. And when you're passing, someone's done something for you. Quite often I'll go to Caroline because she's my port of call for everything. And just being there and saying, you know, thank you. So I just wanted, before I did leave, to say we as councillors have just as much input with our staff. They are our staff, and we're here for everyone, the residents out there, and I think that shouldn't be forgotten. Thank you.
Very well said, Councillor Joy. Thank you for that. I'm not sure how we can fit it into the work action plan. Perhaps it's something you needed to say, but also I'm sure that will need to come out at the LGA group meeting with councillors. Now, Councillor Grigg, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was also very encouraged. I can reiterate what Councillor Joy has said. I was also very encouraged, particularly under 2.7, to see the success of the recognising anxiety and stress. It's an interesting point for myself, really. You mentioned that presentations from outside organisations haven't been very well attended, and I'm very interested to know as to why you think that is, because I'm currently chairman of Maidstone Mind, and we're working very closely with Maidstone businesses, doing presentations to identify the benefits of seeing stress within the workforce, and they have been very successful. So I'm quite interested to know why you think they haven't here.
I suppose, and it's not specific feedback on those sessions, but our kind of evaluation of what we've done over the last couple of years led us to just change the direction of the training. So where previously a lot of what had been delivered and what we discussed with staff was around how to deal with stress once you have stress. So it's kind of, oh, now I've got it, I need to identify it, and a manager needs to identify it. And what we've done with the resilience training is change that approach. It says actually what we should be doing and what we need to encourage staff to do is build our resilience in order that when we hit stressful periods in our life, we are in a better place to be able to deal with them. So what the resilience training does is it talks about kind of having those foundations in place, if you like, in order that you are ready for when those stressful periods come, rather than waiting until you have an employee with stress or you're feeling stressed and what to do with it. Now, obviously I don't know what you're doing at the moment, but certainly the review of what we've done over previous years was very much based on dealing with stress as it came, and the change in tack we took was about, actually, we need to come at this from a different process and build resilience with staff earlier.
Sorry, can I just come back, Madam Chairman? So are you actually saying that, I mean, obviously early intervention is great. Are you saying that the outside agencies weren't going for resilience, they were actually going for recognising stress at a later level? And so if they were to do that, that would be something you'd be interested in being involved with outside agencies again?
I think potentially yes. It's like everything, it comes down to what it is, what the cost might be. As an example, we're training our learning and development officer to be a mental health first aider in order to kind of be able to extend that offering and include that offering. So there are lots of things that we are doing internally now to support staff, but if external resource becomes available that we think will fit or align with that, obviously we'd be open to it.
That's very encouraging, thank you.
I now have Councillor McLaughlin and then I'll have Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's been a lot of discussion recently about the 1% cap on public sector employees' pay. Am I correct? In this council, the 1% is applied to the overall wage pot, but is distributed differently across the salary bands, if you see my point.
So within the medium-term financial strategy, there will be provision for a pay award and also for incremental movement within the scales. Obviously, for the last few years, that has been set at 1%. Although in 2014 or 15, whenever this committee agreed to reshape our pay grades slightly because we'd fallen behind the market median, the cost of that was actually 2%. So that was an example of where this committee did some things that then P&R had to find the money for. And Mr. Riley, if you ever attended P&R, was backwards and forwards between the two committees for a while. Because we are not bound by the government's pay bodies, we determine pay ourselves. So if we chose to, we could pay nothing or significantly more than 1%. That is for this council to set. In terms of how we distribute whatever is in the medium-term financial strategy in the pot, if you like, then that is something that we discuss generally with the leader at the time. But so sometimes we have done a flat 1% and it's gone on all the grades 1 to 16. And sometimes we have paid more to the lower paid and less or nothing to the higher paid. That's the sort of conversation we would have with the leader.
So when will you be having that conversation? And what input will this committee have?
So this committee has no input to that. If you remember back to my presentation, you have an input where we are changing the policy in terms of how we pay. P&R have an input into how much we pay. So the P&R setting what's in the pot is in the normal budget setting processes. So I'm not sure. I think you have to sign off the budget. I think they do that in about December. We start the pay negotiations. We write to the trade unions asking for their claim in September. We expect their claim back by November, and we start discussions in December, January.
And any pay adjustments take place, presumably the 1st of April or something like that. I mean, I'm naturally interested in helping lower paid staff out of the pot. And I know it happened before, and I think it should continue to happen. So if I can just make that point and get it minuted under making sure our staff are properly rewarded, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. That'll go in the minute as opposed to the actual action plan, because the action plan is a 6-monthly thing. Okay, I thank you for that point, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to support and strongly reinforce my personal support, and I believe the support of my group, on the statement made by Councillor Joy. I think you made a very powerful statement concerning the treatment of staff, and I think that is very, very, very important. In business I've been in for the last 35 years, saying thank you is something that is absolutely fundamental to what we do. And I think that is also very, very important. We do get I personally think we get a marvellous service from our officers, actually. I know I go and see them and worry them and ask them awkward questions. They always are very polite and they always come back. And I think we're duty-bound to show respect to all the officers of Maidstone Borough Council. And as I say, I have a personal commitment to that, and I want to make sure, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of my group, that we all have that personal commitment, and I shall make sure that personal commitment stays, because I think this is incredibly, incredibly important, and I'd like to see that minuted in our support for Councillor Joy's statement, which I think was a very, very well-made statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I'm very glad you said that, Councillor Perry. Thank you. And Councillor Stockel, I'm sure that you'd be there to support what Councillor Perry says. Thank you. Now, where was I? I think, actually, did anybody else have anything they would like to say? We've had quite a good innings. It's been quite a long meeting. I think we've gone through quite a lot of things we weren't quite expecting to, because at the end of the day, we have an action plan in front of us, which will be adjusted to take into account the response, the outcome of the IIP as expressed in the report. And my own voice on that would be that on page 14 of the action plan, where senior leadership is visible, employees feel that senior leaders are approachable and live the values. Now, along there, one of the actions is that staff forum representatives should attend CLT, which is the corporate leadership team, once a month. And I understand that that hasn't happened yet, but I am assured that it will be happening. Aren't I, Mrs. Smart?
Thank you, Chair. So, when we were doing the update, we had a kind of conversation about, well, why hasn't it happened? And that's why when I was doing my verbal kind of run through the things that we're going to put onto the action plan in the future, I described it as ensuring that employees have a voice. So when this originally was written, we've seen it work well where as kind of staff, almost like a staff committee, every month or so are able to go to CLT and say, actually, this is the sorts of stuff that the staff are concerned about, whether it be toilets, car parking, whatever it happens to be. So it gives them an ear, if you like, of the senior managers. The issue with the staff forum is that it's just not that sort of group. Over the years, what has happened with the staff forum is it's not a place where other members of staff go to the representatives to say, I've got an issue with this, I've got an issue with that. It's actually a group that come together, and it's about that top-down message. So we do involve them, we do ask their views sometimes, but it's more about telling them what's going on in the organisation. So actually, in terms of them being the recipients of the views from the whole staff group, it just doesn't work that well. So I wouldn't necessarily want to say, yes, that's going to start, but I think what we need to see is an alternative proposal that will incorporate getting the voice of the staff heard. I'm not quite sure what that is yet.
No, but at least it's on the radar. Thank you, Mrs. Smart. So, therefore, members, the recommendation is that members note the progress to date. We could, if we want to, substitute alternative actions or add to the existing ones, but quite frankly, I think this is obviously, the action plan is obviously going to be updated. We will see the next version, and if then we're not happy, that will be the time to... And we're also going to have the other report coming. So, members, are you all agreed to the recommendation that we note the progress on the action plan to date? Thank goodness. Do you think I can close the meeting, or... Hallelujah. Thank you very much indeed, members. Thank you.